And welcome back to the next chapter in the 20 Strongest Captain Class Shinigami series. We are in the top three now. And as far as most of you can see, or as all of you can see, number three in the top 20, the third strongest Captain Class Shinigami character in the series from the full roster abilities we have seen from the Shinigami is none other than, and excluding obviously Aizen, who was well beyond that and became something entirely, is Kenpachi Zaraki, the 11th, the ninth, no, he's the, oh crap, I actually can't remember which Kenpachi he is. I think he is the 11th Kenpachi, isn't he? He's the 11th of the 11th, but, the self-proclaimed strongest Shinigami, the holder of the title Kenpachi, the one who will not drop. Kenpachi Zaraki, I actually heard it best when I think someone was talking to Kubo about this and said, how can Kenpachi do these things? Like with this, and this. And basically he just said, logic doesn't apply to Kenpachi. He's kind of the character that Kubo gets to basically say, all right, I love this character. He is supposed to be a monster in terms of strength. I will write him as such. Doesn't matter what he can do. You know, giant meteor, smash it one shot. Vacuum of space, he brushes that off. Bomb exploding in his face, that's basically kind of like a nuke. He's only mildly hurt. Gets his nerves ending and his arm basically starts to fold in like a meatball. Just tear it off casually. Giant fighting him, cut him in half. You know, the rules kind of don't apply to Kenpachi. And it goes, and even from the introduction of this character, we kind of got that to some degree. Kenpachi, from this first conception, from his first introduction to the series, is different than the other. Like, he gives off a very different tone than the other characters do. He's someone who fights just because he loves to fight. I don't, obviously, none of us like the Bount arc really that much. And those of us who do probably don't love it. But there are some decent moments in there, particularly the one fight episode that has Kenpachi in it, the fight with Maki. Maki has, why do you fight? He's like, you want to know why I fight? Because it amuses me. To get my Jiraiya Kenpachi voice on. Same voice actor who did that. At least until he got replaced. I don't know if he quit, contract, whatever. But the minute they changed that voice actor, I'm like, no, give me back the original voice. That was so much better. Like, that's the voice I hear when I hear Kenpachi. Like, he fights for the sheer love of it, but he's not stupid. Like, he's actually very perceptive when it comes to people, how to fight. That's how he beat Tozen. That's how he was able to identify that Tozen and Gin were the only two captains afraid to die. He is a mass of power, even by other captains' standards. He is a legitimate monster in terms of strength, durability, endurance, and raw Ryatsu. There is probably no captain in the Soul Society now who has more Ryatsu than him. He has far beyond, even with his eye patch sealed in the original Soul Society arc, his Ryatsu level was comparable to Byakuya Kushi's sealed. So even then, apart from probably Yamamoto and maybe Unohana, because we know Unohana still would have ended up beating him. Although that doesn't imply more Ryatsu, it just implies more skill. But apart from them, no one probably had more Ryatsu than Kenpachi did. And for the longest time, he was considered among the strongest captains in the Soul Society with just his sheer fighting prowess alone. Even before he got his Shikai and unlocked his true potential, he was the only captain to be considered a special war potential on the Sternritter's list. He was the only captain they were legitimately afraid of. Take that into consideration. This guy who can see and alter any future he sees found him to be the only captain that was a legitimate threat. Not even Yamamoto was put on that list. Then you have to get into a Shikai, which is basically a giant power tool that cuts through literally anything. Meteors, the vacuum of space and time composed into this little dimensional room. The only thing you couldn't cut was Gerard Valkyrie's shield and sword, and that's only, I think that's more of a testament how durable those were versus how strong Nozarashi was. And then they give him a Bankai, which turns him into a freaking Kishin Oni warrior, which literally could allow him to grab a giant fist coming up full force, probably could have decimated skyscrapers, giant chunks of a Bardvelve. Grabbed it with his teeth, stopped the momentum, and then ripped the damn thing off at the shoulder, sliced his shield and his face and arm from a distance, and then when he came flying back up, he again cut him in half from a distance. Like, he cut so fast, so hard, that the vacuum of air literally cut him in two. The only downside he had was, it was the first time he activated his Bankai, his body couldn't handle it and started to break apart. So, and then we actually find out later on in the 1,000-year, in the Camp of Your Own World novel arc, that he's actually he's also very well versed in judo, because when he's not using swordsmanship, he practices with his squad members in judo. So he's actually, and I mean, we've seen it a couple times where he is deadly barehanded too. So Kenpachi is just nuts. Now, there are three captain class characters he lost against, and the first two are coming up right now. And that is Yamamoto and Ichibei. Now, against Ichibei, I actually think it's a more decisive loss just because of the nature of Ichibei and the nature of Ichimonji. I do think, though, that Kenpachi is someone that he knows he has to beat, because we don't really have a good comparison of how strong Ichibei is to someone like Kenpachi. We know he actually was manhandling Iwak, who manhandled, granted, a copy of him, a duplicate, but still manhandled Kenpachi. But that was Kenpachi before he was fully realized. A fully realized Kenpachi versus Ichibei, power-wise, that is difficult to say where they stand on each other, which pedestal they both stand on. Like, I might still argue he has more Ryatsu and is a better swordsman than Ichibei, but Ichibei's got experience, wisdom, knowledge, Kido, and that damn Ichimonji, which is a frightening-ass Zanpakuto. Like, and unfortunately, because Kenpachi is such a blunt fighter, he can't avoid Ichimonji's ability to cut names in half. Then the ink gets on him, and unfortunately, that's all she wrote. Surprisingly, he stands a much better shot against Yamamoto, because I do believe Kenpachi, because Kenpachi Ryatsu can act like an armor and just kind of coat him in his skin to make him very hard to cut and hurt. I think he would just, charge through flames with no problem whatsoever. I don't think there's any, I don't think there's any real indication that, well, the flames would definitely hurt him, certainly. I think Kenpachi would be able to handle the flames very well and give Yamamoto a really solid fight as long as Yamamoto's not using Bankai. If we are factoring Bankai into the equation, Kenpachi's got a problem. His Ryatsu probably can only protect him from so long, even as high as it is. I don't even know if it still beat the old man's Ryatsu, even at its peak. That said, there is one argument I can make for Kenpachi beating Yamamoto in Bankai, and that is his own Bankai. We see in his fight with Gerard Valkyrie that he can cut opponents down just by the sheer force, speed, and power of his cut, and we cut him down from a distance. In theory, Kenpachi, if he has control of his Bankai and is aware of what he's doing in that Bankai, he could cut Yamamoto from a distance and kill him. But that is a very theoretical scenario that I can't count as actual fact. So while there's a theoretical scenario where he could beat Yamamoto, it ultimately is not likely. So he does lose against those two. But then he kind of clean shop. With Soifone, her Suzume Bachi's primary ability, her two-step skill, I actually don't think really does much against Kenpachi, because I think it's a similar case like it was with Aizen. His Ryatsu just greatly overpowers her Ryatsu, and therefore Suzume Bachi doesn't work. Likened to the fact that I'm not even sure she might be able to pierce his skin. Her Shunko would be entertaining to him for a little bit, but he'd get tired of that. And he's tanked explosions before to the face, so her Bankai isn't going to be doing much. So she'd probably lose. Almost certainly lose. Gin and Rose. Rose would not last very long against Kenpachi. He would probably ignore the effects of Kinshiro Butadan pretty handily, and then just cut him down, or cut the Bankai down even. Gin would be a little trickier, but the thing is, Kenpachi's reaction speed is enough that, even though he's been taken surprise before, this was like Nirotora, all that, and that's with abilities that were just really weird, like Pernida still caught him off guard. But no one was expecting Pernida. Like, Kenpachi has the reaction time and speed to be able to, keep up with something like Kamishina no Yari, and Shinsa with no problem. ultimately, I do think he'd probably overpower him without too much difficulty. So yeah, I do think Gin loses. We know for a fact he beats Unohana in a fight because he did. I mean, that was before he even gained Shikai and Bankai. That was right before he gained Shikai. But we know he ultimately beats Unohana in a fight. That just happened. Shinji is a tricky individual because against a lot of people, Shinji would do pretty well. Against people who can fight from all sides, basically deliver attacks that are omnidirectional and he can't avoid, he's no good. Or people who can figure out the trick behind Sakanade. And Kenpachi is someone I think would figure out the trick. He figured out the trick with Tozen. He's got innate battle instincts that just allow him to kind of... He basically has a sixth sense. That's the problem. His sixth sense counteracts the visual distortion and sounds that he's hearing. So, yeah, so I do believe he would completely overwhelm and surprise Shinji with Sakanade's ability. Against his age-old rival Byakuya. In the early stages, even though I'm not a big Byakuya fan, even I'd agree, he probably would have beaten Kenpachi, who still would have given him probably a good fight. But as the series progressed and Kenpachi became more and more OP, it became clear that even though Byakuya did kind of get stronger, we actually never really see much of his improvement. His improvement wasn't anywhere near, like, if Byakuya, if we're going by a perfect 100 for the strongest being in the universe kind of thing, and Byakuya was already standing like at a 75, he grew like maybe to like 80, 85 at best. Whereas Kenpachi was standing at maybe like 60, grew all the way to 90. So the growth was just too great for them to, keep in balance with each other. Kenpachi's Ryatsu would blow away most of Zenbon Zakura Kageyoshi. He easily is competent enough with his sword to be a match for Byakuya, if not better. He is actually capable of using Shimpo. It's just not very refined, so he'd probably be able to keep up with Byakuya to some degree. And he's much better at hand-to-hand combat and just more tanky and durable. So Byakuya, I do think ultimately would lose. Likewise, Sajin would lose terribly. Kenpachi would fight the giant, cut down the giant, and in turn cut down Sajin. It would be horrible. This would be a terrible matchup for Sajin. He's lucky he never actually fought Kenpachi. Shunsui. Now I'll bring it because I'm on low battery, so I'm going to be blitzing through a lot of these at this point. But Shunsui, I brought it up with his video, but it stands to bring it up again. Is that Shunsui I do think beats Kenpachi, but the problem is he only beats Kenpachi by going full all-out Bankai, getting to the last phase. The reason I say this is because ultimately he doesn't have a technique that would really put Kenpachi down. Ira Oni, the Color Demon game, Kenpachi really wouldn't bother playing it very much. And he'd probably figure it out, like, this is boring, I just want to cut and slash. Boshogama, Takeone, they wouldn't be very useful. Kageoni would only be kind of useful. Kenpachi's way too durable for those attacks to work. Same with the rest of the games that he plays, or the techniques he has. So he's Aikido. We know Kenpachi can survive giant explosions of Aikido. He survived level 94 Ikitozus in the Spirits Forever With You novel, multiple of them into the face from the 8th Kenpachi. So he can tank pretty much any of the actual Aikido that Shinsui's going to throw at him. So Bankai is the only real option there. And even then, the first step is actually going to be possibly more detrimental to Shunsui than is Kenpachi, because Kenpachi is just going to be able to take enough damage to have multiple injuries that Shunsui is going to have to sustain, as well as the injuries that Kenpachi took from Shunsui. Or Shunsui took from Kenpachi, which probably aren't going to be as much because he evades Kenpachi a lot in this fight. So then you go into the second one, the disease, which probably does affect Kenpachi, but probably not to a great extent. The Danga, the infinite abyss or whatever, you have to drain the Ryatsu or drown. That's probably not good because Kenpachi's Ryatsu is far exceeds Shunsui's. So the only technique he really has to kill Kenpachi is the freaking suicide thread fate technique, whatever it's called. The thing the razor wire that cuts your throat and blows your head off. And I even argue that maybe Kenpachi's Ryatsu is so great that it maybe offsets that. And he's so durable it offsets that. But that's, again, a maybe. There's no evidence to say it is. So Shunsui does get the win, but it's a hard-fought win where Kenpachi could easily kill him before it happens. But I do think Shunsui ultimately takes the win. The ninth captains, we know for a fact he beats Tozen in a fight because he did. And Kensei really doesn't fare very well. He's too much of a close range fighter, and that's Kenpachi's bread and butter. He wouldn't even have to go Shikai to beat him, quite frankly. Toshiro, he'd be able to stave Kenpachi off. And if he got to his final form, yeah, he'd beat Kenpachi in his final form because he can freeze all matter within 4 seconds, assuming Kenpachi isn't able to get to him beforehand. But the problem is getting to that final form, and Kenpachi, quite frankly, would waste him long before then, because it took a while to get those flower petals down. And so, yeah, even though his ice is very tricky, Kenpachi's Ryatsu and sheer power really does power through it, unfortunately, for Toshiro. Mayuri is someone who didn't actually beat Kenpachi. He saved Kenpachi through a dirty-handed trick. And even then, the Terra Magnitude 4 didn't fully affect Kenpachi. And he even puts out, "You really are a monster." And that's the thing. He needed to stab Kenpachi for that. There's no proof that he wouldn't, because Pernida wasn't paralyzed by that either. So, and I think you have to stab the opponent and then use Terra Magnitude 4 in order for that to work. In an actual fight, Kenpachi could probably ignore most of Mayuri's abilities. The poison, even his limbs, he can most likely ignore that. There's just with his Shuriatsu. He's just too much of a powerhouse for Mayuri to ultimately overcome. He can blow Mayuri's poison away with Konjiki Agisogi Jizo. Any of the drugs he uses, be it the loop or the super serum. The super serum, there's no indication of how that would he'd really get that into Kenpachi. With Silopero, that was in Nemu, so that's how he got it. There's no indication how we'd actually get that drug into Kenpachi. And there's also in the Camp of Your Own World novel, we learned that like rage and emotions like that can overcome Mayuri's drug to some degree. And Kenpachi would easily be able to overcome that as well, quite frankly. More than likely. Like, I doubt Kenpachi would be someone who would... Because Kenpachi's got a very good perception of his surroundings and who he is and other people. I think he'd have a good enough perception to to figure out what's going on and actually, stop doing the same trick. So I do think none of the drugs Mayuri would throw at him would really do anything. Last two real quick, and then we're done because I'm really low on battery. Urahara. We just did Urahara. And the weird thing about Urahara is, Urahara I don't think wins against Kenpachi because Urahara's best ability is the infinite amount of countermeasures he has for different scenarios. But he doesn't have anything that we know of to immediately counter Kenpachi, to counter the amount of Ryatsu, his durability, his sheer brute force power. Brute force, the sheer power, sheer cutting ability, his sheer battle prowess. Yes, Urahara is a great swordsman and a great tactician, but there's only so much you can do against. But he didn't have a huge amount of he ran out of countermeasures against Askin, so he was forced to do his Bankai, and then it came down to one of the 1,000 moments he said, one of those few scenarios in the 1,000 moments he said, when he had to escape. He doesn't really have any... Again, with prep time, he'd make something to beat Kenpachi, sure, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about going in with the things he already has. His Bankai's no good against Kenpachi. Kenpachi could cut that thing in half, no problem. So ultimately comes down to, is there anything he actually has that is useful enough against Kenpachi to work? And... while he could certainly do damage with Kido, it's only so useful in this sort of scenario. Again, Kenpachi has tanked very high-level Kido and kept going before. So, ultimately, yeah, I unfortunately got to go Kenpachi against Urahara, and those two of my favorite characters. Against Rukia to end it out, he does beat Rukia in a fight. Not because he's immune to having his molecules, reduced to absolute zero, but because his Ryatsu is so high that he pretty much would offset the temperature of Rukia. She goes to absolute zero, but his Ryatsu is so high, she probably couldn't maintain that for that 4 seconds. And even if it hits him, his Ryatsu would probably just counteract that, so he might get some damage, but he's not going to be overly hurt. Her Bankai, he can honestly just counteract that with Ryatsu, or get out of the way if he has to. I mean, he's not dumb. He will move if he has to. He just prefers just to hack and slash. That's just who he is. But I do think ultimately he would beat Rukia out in a fight. Ultimately, though, that is the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. We're down to the last two now. Who's it going to be, Yama or Ichibei? We'll find out next week. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, share, subscribe. As always, if you want us to review something, put in the comments below. Let us know. We'll do a review of it at some point. I just would win Star Wars, Superhero, Magic, what if. Anything you do on the channel, put that in the comments below. Let me know. I'll get to that at some point. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.